Happy Friday, sophomores. Let's get started with week 9, lesson 43, and then we can head into the weekend. Today's joke of the day had me cracking up. Why don't melons get married? Because they can't elope. Get it? Like elope. They can go off and get married, but they're cantaloupe. So as you know, we are on day 5 of week 9. The video you should be watching right now is called ELA G10W9L43. Of course, the text is My Possessions, Myself. And today you'll be conducting a research study and reflecting on it. And when you get down to the lesson itself, make sure you read the material section to remind yourself of everything you need for today. The learning target for today is, I can conduct a research study that explores the concept of self and draw conclusions from my research. So today is going to be very, very, very exciting because you're going to take all the work you've done in preparing for the research study and actually conduct the research study today with the person you selected and then draw conclusions from your research. Let's quickly discuss the Read, Think, Talk, Write protocol for today. For the read section, you're going to reread the list of possessions you brainstormed from yesterday, and you're going to make a prediction on which items your person will sort into the self pile and which items they will sort into the non-self pile. So you're going to make predictions based on what you know about this person. For the Think section, you're going to think about how you want to execute the research. And this will all make sense when you go to the note catcher. You're going to look at the suggested options on the note catcher and circle the one that works best for you and prepare accordingly. And we'll actually go over this today in the model, but you're going to have 2 different options to choose from and how you want to carry out this research study. And it's up to you to choose the one that makes the most sense for you based on the materials you have and what you think will be the easiest for the person you're researching to engage with. For the talk section, you're going to sit down with the person you chose or call them if you don't live with them and begin the research process. Follow the same process that's described in the article, My Possessions, Myself, but a summary of this process is also described in your note catcher, which we'll also talk about today in the model. Then for the writing section, you're going to look through the results from your research, and on your note catcher, you're going to answer the guided questions to help you reflect on the data from your research. So on the note catcher, you'll see like the different steps listed out from the research study, from the article itself to remind you of like what you have to do when you conduct the research study. And then you're going to see for the writing section, you have to answer some questions to help you sort of draw conclusions about the research study and make generalizations about the data. For the closing today, you're going to share your findings with the person you researched, ask them if they think your conclusions are accurate, why or why not. So after you conducted the research study, after you answer the reflection questions and make conclusions and generalizations about the data, share those conclusions and generalizations with the person you researched. They can actually read your reflections themselves if they want. And then they have to basically tell you if they feel like your conclusions are accurate, why or why not. So you'll have a conversation about what they put, your conclusions, and if they agree or disagree. And then after that, you're going to read a book for 20 minutes. And as always, document your reading on the reading log. So the model today is going to be around really supporting you in preparing and executing your own research study. So to do that, I just wanted to one more time go over the parts of the Read, Think, Talk, Write protocol that relate to the actual research study and drawing of conclusions, but just the Think, Talk, Write part today. And then we'll be all on the same page for you to go off and complete the research study and draw conclusions. So for the Think part today, you really got to think about how you want to execute the research. You'll see some suggested options, and you have to prepare accordingly. So in a second, in the model, I'll sort of like go over the 2 options with you, and then you can choose which of the 2 you want to do for your own research study. For the talk section, you're going to actually begin the research process, sit down face-to-face with the person that you chose or on the phone if they're not with you. And we're also going to go over in the model in a second a summary of this process. So you can just make sure you know everything that has to happen for the research study. And then for the writing section, you're going to look through the results, and you're actually going to then answer the guided questions to help you reflect on the data so you can make generalizations. And this is all on the note catcher, which we'll go over in a second, but just remember that if you don't know what anything is talking about, go to the note catcher and it'll guide you. Okay, let's start with the 2 options that are listed here, also on your note catcher, that basically are suggested options of how you can carry out the research study. You have to choose one of the 2 options. So option 1, you can write each of the items on a separate note card and have your person sort the items into the appropriate piles, just like they did in the original study. So this is like exactly the same as the original study in the article. You're going to write each of the items you generated. So there's 8 from each category, 32 total. You can put them on separate note cards, and then the person in your research study will actually sort them into the piles throughout the study, like physically sort them with the note cards. That's option 1. Option 2 is read out the items to your person in a random order, not in the same order that's listed on the brainstorming list, because that may skew the data. Have your person sort them onto a separate sheet of paper as you read them. So you'll actually have them like on a separate sheet of paper, have like, pile 1, pile 2, self, non-self, and then they'll actually write in under each heading the item as you read them. And that is really for people that don't have note cards. So really the thing you have to think about is like, do you have the materials for option 1? Option 1 is more authentic because it's them reading the item themselves, and it's what happened in the research study. But if you don't have like paper or note cards, it doesn't have to be note cards, it can be paper, slips of paper. If you don't have that, then you can read them out and just make sure you read in a random order. And same with the option 1, even if you're writing them out, shuffle the deck so it's not all of the body parts listed back to back or all the people listed back to back. They should be random. So the first step is to think about both of these options, which one works best for you, which one can you do, because maybe you can't do option 1, and then pick the option that works best and go with it. So the next part of the note catcher is a refresher of the research process. It's sort of a summary of the steps of the research process. This part's really important because you want to make sure you're super clear on what is happening during the research study, because if you start conducting the research study with the person you're interviewing and you're a little bit foggy in the details and you accidentally mess something up, if you go back and redo it with that person, you can do that, but it's sort of going to mess up the authenticity of the research. So avoid at all costs, if you can, errors, and try to fully understand all the details of the research process now so that you can do it in one sitting and not potentially compromise the validity or authenticity of the data. So I'm going to go over each of the steps with you real quick. Step 1 is you're going to tell the person you are interviewing to sort the 32 cards into 2 separate piles. Items they consider to be a part of their self and items they consider to be a part of their non-self. So you don't have to define what self and non-self means to the person you're researching, because that's up to them to decide. Each person has a different definition of self and non-self. But if they're struggling, you can give them an example. Like maybe have an example ready from your own life of something that would be an item for the self category and something that would be an item for the non-self category, but it shouldn't be an item from the list of 32 that they're going to look at, because you don't want to skew the data. So have something in the back of your mind as an example for both categories, but just make sure it's not from the list. So they have these cards and they're going to sort into 2 piles. The last thing I wanted to say about this is it doesn't have to be even. Like there doesn't have to be 16 items in self and 16 items in non-self. It can be 22 in self and 10 in non-self, or 25 in non-self and 7 in self. Like it's totally up to the person. There's no like split down the middle that has to be achieved. It's totally personal to the person you're researching. So don't get anxious if you notice that they're putting the majority in one category. That's just the way they feel, and that's totally fine. Now, step 2 and step 3 can happen in either order. It doesn't have to happen in the order that's listed here, but I wanted to just like talk about them in an order so it makes sense to you what they have to do. So step 2 is you're going to have them sort the cards from the self pile into one of 2 new piles, items that represent a lot of self and items that represent a little of self. So you don't have to go to this one first. You can start with the non-self pile if you want, like I said, but they're going to start with one pile. Let's just say self for this purpose here. And they're going to go to the self pile and they're going to take each of the items, if it's 16 items or 22 items, and they're going to sort each of those items into 2 separate categories. Items that have to do a lot with their self, items that have to do with a little of their self. So we know all of these items have to do with self because they already sorted them into the self category. So they're not determining if this has to do with self or non-self. They already did that. They're just determining the degree to which this connects to their idea of self. So something that like is totally a part of them and totally a part of their self-identity, they'll put in the lot of self category, and something that is still a part of their self, but maybe not as much a part of their self as something else in the lot of self category, they'll put in the little of self category. So they're basically just differentiating between the degree of how much something would be in the self category. Now, step 3 is the exact same process, but for the other pile, the non-self pile. So they're going to sort the cards from the non-self pile into one of 2 new piles, items that represent a lot of non-self and items that represent a little of non-self. So again, all of these have to do with non-self. These weren't put into the self pile to begin with, but now they have to figure out which of these items like definitely don't have to do with their self identity, so they're like a lot of non-self, or maybe only a little bit a part of their non-self identity. So they like could maybe go into the self category, but they didn't to begin with, so they're going to go in the little category, little bit of non-self. But there are some things that are inevitably going to be a lot of non-self, because that thing that has nothing to do with their self identity. So these steps can be confusing. Feel free to like explain it over and over again to the person you're researching. I imagine in the real research study, the researcher had to explain it in multiple ways, and make any modifications or adjustments to the explanation or to the design that you feel like will help the person that you're researching make more sense of it. And don't change the design principles, but you can change the preparation of it. Like I gave you an example of a note cards you could use, or reading it to them. Maybe on the note cards you want to use markers and draw a picture or something next to each item, because that maybe will help them like fully understand what you mean by that item. You can do that if you want. That's extra work on your part, but you know the person you're researching best, and you'll know what they need to be successful in this research study. So do whatever you can or whatever you need to make sure that this research study is fully non-biased and is super clear, so they can engage in it to their best ability. And the last part of the note catcher is for you to basically draw conclusions or generalizations from the research you just conducted. I'm going to go over each of the 4 questions with you. I'm obviously not going to answer them because I haven't conducted this research study, but I'm just going to make sure you're clear on the questions themselves, because this is going to help you make conclusions, and this will be the part that you actually discuss in the closing with the person you research. They're going to look at your conclusions here and tell you if they agree or disagree. So question 1 is, did your person sort more items into the self or the non-self pile? So this is where you're going to count. You're going to count how many they originally put in their self pile, how many they originally put in their non-self pile. If it's 16 and 16, you'll just write even, but I guarantee it'll probably be like one, you'll have at least a majority in either the self or non-self pile. Number 2, what were some of the items your person sorted into the self pile and non-self pile that surprised you the most? So you're still thinking about the self and non-self pile, not one of the other piles yet. And which of these surprised you based on what you know about that person? Which of these surprised you in either the self or non-self pile? Is there something that you thought they totally would put in the self pile, but they put in the non-self pile? Or is there something you totally thought they'd put in the non-self pile, but they put in the self pile? So just use your relationship with this person to make predictions. You probably already made your predictions before, but right here, right down here under number 2, which ones shocked you the most? Number 3, what were some of the items your person sorted into the little of self pile and the lot of non-self pile that surprised you the most? So now you're thinking about the little of self and the lot of non-self. So these are grouped together intentionally because it's probably easy for people to predict what would go in a lot of self pile, because like what your person is like super passionate about, and it's probably easy to predict what would go in the little of non-self pile, just because like if it's something that like maybe they're connected to but not like super connected to, you may have an idea what would go there, but it may be shocking to you like what went all the way in the lot of non-self pile. So now you're just thinking about like specifically what were you most surprised about in the little of self pile and the lot of self pile. Number 4, overall, based on what you know about your person, did your research match with your predictions and how your person would sort items? Explain. So you're just thinking about in general what you know about this person. I imagine if someone you're pretty close with, if you chose them for this research study, if you live with them, they're a family member or a friend, like to some capacity, they're an extension of you. They're really close to you. You live with them. You are part of their life every single day for the most part. So you probably have an idea of how they would answer. Or if it's a friend, like it's a friend who clearly cares enough about you to engage in this research study with you, so you probably know a lot about their life, even if they're not physically with you or living with you, if you're talking to them on the phone or whatever. So you have some idea ahead of time of how they were going to answer. So you really just got to talk here about overall, do you think like your research, the research you did with them matched the predictions of what you thought they were going to do with each of the items and the sorting of the items, and explain that. So this is sort of like your final stab at like making a generalization or conclusion about the research study as a whole, whereas questions 1 through 3 ask you to like, look at one specific part of the research study. Question 4 asks you to make like general conclusions or generalizations based on your own personal relationship. Now in the real research study, this would be a part of the reflection where they would talk about the findings across all the people that they had in the study. But I think it was over 250 people, right? But you're only doing this just with one person, and the purpose of this research study is not the same purpose of the research study in the article. You're not trying to make generalizations about humankind or about people in general. You're just trying to see if like your understanding of this person that you're interviewing matches with how they actually sorted cards into each of the piles. So you're just trying to like get to know them a little bit better and make predictions about them based on what you know about their life and if they would, sort cards into either piles a specific kind of way based on what you know about their life. So hopefully my model gave you the clarity needed to fully engage in the research study today with the person you're researching. If you are still confused, which is totally fine, there's a lot to this, go back to the lesson plan, read it again, even watch this video again if you need to, because I want to make sure everyone is super clear before engaging in the research study today, because we haven't had a lesson like this before where you've had to take what you read and applied it to a real person in real life. So definitely go back and reread if you need to. Next week is our final week of lessons. It's week 10. And the first lesson of next week on Monday is lesson 44. The learning target is I can complete first read annotations to help with comprehension and future analysis of the text. No surprise here. The first lesson of a new week is always a first read lesson. So we're going to engage in a first read of a brand new text. And the text is called A Time Capsule Long Forgotten at the Space Needle is Found. The Space Needle is in Seattle. And if you don't know what a time capsule is, you're going to learn about it next week. It's a really exciting article. You'll get a chance to learn about this specific time capsule, but maybe even start thinking about creating your own time capsule. So I'm super excited for it. Thank you so much for learning with me today. I really, really, really appreciate it. It's always a lot of fun. A few quick reminders before I go. Number 1, don't forget to talk about your lesson with someone. Number 2, read 20 minutes and complete a reading log entry. The reading log is at the front of your packet. And number 3, practice reading fluency using the first or second page of your weekly reading, and you can go back to the front of the packet to remind yourself what you have to do for reading fluency. As always, email your teacher for support. If you have any questions, they are your first line of defense. Thank you so much for your time today, and remember, keep learning.